We're back today with the fireworks block. This is a great 12-inch finished block that will fit into any sampler quilt or help you participate in any swath that you have going on. So grab a couple of scraps or fat quarters and let's get going. I would call this block suitable for an adventurous beginner. The construction is relatively simple, but you will be working with some small pieces. And there is some, I'm going to say, fussy cutting involved. I have the free pattern here that's available on my website, and there are a couple of pieces that you're going to need to be cutting with 1/8 inch increments. There are some 2 7/8 inch squares, and then there's a 3 3/8 inch square to cut. Now, the 1/8 inch lines on your ruler are no different than other lines. If it would help, you can use some washi tape on the back of your ruler to help you identify that line. Or if you're into collecting rulers like I am, there is the Itty Bitty 8s ruler from Creative Grids that has a little bit more visible 1/8 inch lines. So if you are going to be cutting a lot of 1/8 inch increments in your quilting life, then maybe that ruler is for you. But you can cut these with any regular ruler. You just need to pay attention to those little dashed lines. I have all of my fabric cut into squares, but I'm going to go ahead and lay everything out, make sure I have all of the pieces that I need, and also double check. There are some pieces that I need to cut on the diagonal that I haven't done yet, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Make sure I have everything ready before we get started. Now that all my fabric is really prepped, it's time to start with the first construction element of this block, and it is creating this slashed red piece. We need our E pieces, which are my red rectangles, and then the B, which are the small background pieces. Now there is one tricky bit to this in that we need half of our red pieces kind of slanting from the bottom right up to the top left, and we need half of them going the opposite direction. So from the bottom left up to the top right. So to avoid confusion, I'm going to go ahead and lay out 4 of my red rectangles, and I'm going to make these all going the same way. So I'm going to align my first white square to the top of my red rectangle. Now I have 4 of these laid out with just the one white square. I'm going to make sure I draw the diagonal sewing line in the same direction on these 4. So I'm making 4 identical pieces here. Now I'm going to lay out the other 4 and draw that line going the other way. So I know that I'm starting out with the right orientation for half of my pieces. So see how these diagonal lines are pointing in different directions? If you sew them all in the same direction, then you won't be able to have this nice corner unit because the slants will be off. So just take the time, lay it out, do 4 at a time, however you want to organize it. Just make sure that you have half going one way and half going the other way. Now I'm going to sew on these lines. These are snowball corners. So I'm going to stitch directly on that line, cut off any excess, and then press that corner out. Once these are sewn, I'm going to cut to the outside. You can do this with a rotary cutter or scissors. I find it a little quicker just to do it with scissors, but if you are a rotary cutter fan, then that will work as well. And I'm just eyeballing about 1/4 inch seam allowance here. You don't have to be absolutely exact. Just get the bulk of the fabric out of the way. So I have my first corners snowballed, and now we just need to repeat that on the other end of these rectangles. And for this, the only trick is to make sure that you're drawing that diagonal in the same direction. So we want to make sure that we're mirroring the diagonal we can see rather than drawing it towards. If you draw it towards and open it up, you're going to end up with little teeny tiny flying geese, which is adorable, but it's not what we're going for here. So make sure that when you put that ruler down, you're parallel to that seam that you can already see. So you're just going to repeat that process for all 8 of these red rectangles, and then we'll be done with the fussiest part of this block and ready to assemble our units. Now that we have our teeny tiny little snowball units finally done, and just to check, they're pointing either towards or away from each other. They're pointing in opposite directions rather than all in the same way. So now that we have those done, we can assemble the corners of this block. And it's this section here that is the A, B, C, and E pieces. Now we have our little red slashy bits, and we are going to put those so that they're pointing in the same direction, and they'll be oriented at a 90-degree angle to each other. And then we need the remainder of our little 1.5 inch background pieces and our 1.5 by 2.5 inch rectangles here. And then we need our background squares. Now I'm going to assemble these in a couple of steps. I'm going to sew these two pieces together and these two pieces together while I'm at it. And then I can join this unit here. And then there will be just one last seam to join to finish that corner unit. So let's get going and get this corner unit finished. This is a great opportunity to put some headphones on and listen to something fun and really get through this chain piecing. If you are making more than one block, then these little seams can really add up and add a little bit of time to your day. But just enjoy them. I really enjoy chain piecing, and taking the time to really press between each step will help a lot, especially with these tiny pieces, keeping them nice and square and making your seam allowances really accurate so that when these small pieces come together to form the corner unit, they all fit well with the other pieces that we are going to sew together to make the entire block. I have my corner units all done and they're looking adorable. So now it's time to move on to the side units. Now for the side units, you're going to use the F square, the D triangles, which are the little squares we cut on the diagonal, and then the interior star color, which for me that is orange, and those are the G pieces. And we're gonna make a square and a square here. So just make sure that your background pieces are next to each other on one side and your star pieces are next to each other on one side, rather than it being opposite, kind of alternating corners. So you gotta make sure that your little pieces, your colors are touching. And the strategy here for this is just to tackle one corner at a time. I'm going to start with my background pieces, but it doesn't matter. You could easily start with your orange pieces as well. And I am going to fold these in half. You could press at the iron and get like a really nice crease here, but I usually just do a little finger press just so that I can see the midpoint of this triangle. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my square, and then it makes it easy to just match up those lines. And this is a bias edge on this triangle, so when you are aligning this, you want to make sure that you're not stretching that piece or you will distort it a little bit. Some starch will help if you starched your fabrics, but you can get away with not starching. Just be gentle with your triangles. Once I have those midpoints aligned, then I am going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. And I'm going to repeat that for all of this one corner. I'm going to do all 4 of them, and then I'm going to press them before moving on. If you don't press them out, then we're going to be sewing across the seam and it will be a problem. So just take it one corner at a time, sew all of your pieces, press them out, and then move on to the next corner. If you want to get really fancy, you can do alternate corners, opposite corners at the same time, and because those seams don't intersect, you can get away with it, but I find it easier just to do one at a time. So I'm going to get started and sew all of the corners onto this center diamond. So I have sewn the first side onto my center square, and now it's time to start moving around this square. But there is one thing I wanted to point out. If you are going to move on and do this other background square first, then when you fold this square in half to find that center, you need to remember that there's a 1/4 inch of the square that is trapped in the seam. So if you fold from here to here, your center mark is going to be a little off because there's this extra fabric here that is not included in your fold. So there's two options. You can make sure you keep in mind this little seam allowance back here and make sure you're folding and meeting those two cut edges rather than this cut edge to the seam. Or you can avoid that problem and go ahead and move to the opposite side and sew your star color on these G triangles. So then when you are folding your square in half to find the center of that side, I'm sewing a different triangle on here. I'm sewing the last one on, but the point is still the same. You're going to be folding two sides that already have seams. So you can fold seam to seam and your center mark will be accurate. So the choice is yours. You can either remember to take that seam allowance into account when you fold, when you only have one seam, or you can just do the opposite side and then you don't have to worry about it. You can just fold seam to seam. The choice is yours and your block will come out looking the same way regardless. So I'm going to finish sewing all of these side units and then we'll meet back and finish our block. We made it to the end and it's time for final block assembly. We have the 4 corner units, 4 side units, and this center square to put together into a block. I like to just plop my center square down and then start arranging things around it. So I'm going to put my side units down and I'm just making sure that my star color touches the center star color, the block, and that the background is on the outside. And then for the corner units, we're going to make sure that just all the seams are pointing towards the center of the block. This large square of background should be on the outside. And that'll just help you make sure that all of your red little slashy bits are pointing in the right direction. And that is it. Now we just assemble like you would any 9 patch. I always assemble my units into rows and then sew my rows together. So I sew 1 to 2 if this is like a number pad, and then this to 3. And I repeat that 4 to 5 to 6, and then 7, 8, and then those go to 9. And then just sew those last 2 long seams across the middle. And that just gives you some nice points to match up so that that center square is really nice and centered and has nice seams around it. So the tutorial you just watched was filmed quite a while ago, and since I finished it and had all this time, I realized that I liked that block so much that I wanted to make a whole quilt out of it. So I upsized the block, added some sashing, and made a full pattern available for you guys. So there's 2 downloads available for this video. There's the 12-inch version we just made. That's just a 1-page pattern. And then there's the multi-page, I think it's like 5 or 6 page pattern with all the diagrams and fabric requirements and everything for a full quilt. And those are both available down in the description below. Or you can always go to my website, tinyorchardquilts.com, and get them there. I have several things in the works for upcoming videos, but I'm just so glad that I got this one out for you guys, and I hope that you guys enjoyed it. Until next time, happy quilting!